The debate that I'm going to be doing, as broad as the topic is, with Dustin Smith, that's who I'm responding to in the comments I'll be making here. Anyway, Dr. Smith put up a video, and it is on the subject of 1 Timothy 3:16. And one of the reasons I wanted to respond to it was not so much to disagree. I disagreed with some of his conclusions, certainly with his exegesis. Most of what he said about the variant and the reasons for the variant, as far as the textual critical stuff, was fairly accurate. I did not agree that he went with a sort of a conspiracy theory perspective, and that is that this variant arose around the time of the Council of Nicaea, and so someone's purposefully trying to insert the deity of Christ into the text when it wasn't there before. There, as I will show you, there is a simple explanation for how the variant arose. It's a very easy explanation, and when there are simple, easy explanations, you do not need to have conspiracy theories. If you see what's on the screen here you have, and by common confession, great is the mystery of godliness. He who is manifest in the flesh, justified in the spirit, or vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed on in the nations amongst the Gentiles, goes on from there. The variant is marked rather clearly right here. So you have, see this little mark in the Nestle-Aland apparatus. You go over to the data, and here you find it right there, same mark, and you're given the variants. So Codex D, Codex Vesicantivirgensis, the Living Bible of the Early Church, and some Latin manuscripts have a neuter pronoun instead of the masculine, which is what you have Haas over here. That's a very minor variant. But then here's the major variant right here. Manuscript 88 and a few others, PC is Palsy, a few others, have ha theos, so the word God with the article. But then theos, without the article, is read by the corrector of Sinaiticus, that's Codex Aleph there, corrector of Alexandrinus, second hand of C, second hand of Vesicantivirgensis, Psi, 1739, 1881. 1739, 1881, fairly important minuscule manuscripts from the turn of the millennium, and it is the majority reading. So this Fraktur M is majority text, majority reading, and manuscripts of the Vulgate, Latin translation. The text, now you will notice that there are no papyri. 365, a few others, and some of the early church fathers, a few others that are listed. So the point is, the King James and the New King James say God was manifested in the flesh. Everybody else says he who was manifested in the flesh. Now, you can see why the King James onlyists or the Unitarians are attracted to this text. Why? Well, for the exact opposite reasons. For the exact opposite reasons. So what was Stephen Anderson's thing? What is the constant King James only diatribe about this? Those liberal Bible translators, they hate the deity of Christ, and they're taking it out of the Bible, and God's true Bible, the King James Version, says God was manifest in the flesh, and they hate that, and so they take it out, and blah, 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 blah. And they preach sermons, and they pound on the pulpit, and I'm sure Stephen Anderson climbed on top of his pulpit at least once in preaching about something like this. And then, the irony, to me anyways, was here's a Unitarian that I'm going to be debating, and here is the opposite perspective. Now, Dr. Smith is significantly more trained, erudite, convincing in his presentations than Stephen Anderson. In fact, I'd like to suggest, I would like to suggest to Dr. Smith, because I imagine he'll probably watch this. He'll probably see that I mention this. But I would like to suggest, Dustin, how about you challenge Stephen Anderson to debate this text? That would, I would pay to watch that. If that was pay-per-view, I'd pay $20 to watch that particular one live, just for the fun of it. That would be intriguing. And of course, it would put me in a weird position, because, I'm not going to be rooting for the Unitarian. But, when the Unitarian's right about the reading, but wrong about why, it's going to put you in a strange situation. So anyway, if you just look at the textual data, what you see is a majority text reading, theos, God, versus a minority text reading, hos, he who. However, the minority text reading is by far the earliest. And so then you'll start hearing, well, earliest doesn't mean better. And whenever you're dealing with King James onlyism or TR onlyism or Byzantine text onlyism, whatever set of arguments you're going to run into will depend upon the variant that you're looking at. So in this one, the earliest reading is clearly hos. And so you'll attack older is better. But then when you run into TR readings and King James readings that themselves are minority readings that go against the Byzantine majority, then they just abandon all that. And they adopt a different form of argumentation. Because they're not actually arguing about how you find out what the text is. They're actually just defending a particular text. And so you just use whatever arguments you need to use to come up with the text you've already decided is the right one. That's how it works. So there's the variant. Is it God was manifest in the flesh? Now, when I give this presentation, I will give other examples. For example, John 1:18, where God is used of Jesus in the earlier texts, but not in the later texts. And of course, the King James onlyists try to ignore that one as much as possible, or blame it on Gnosticism. Again, no consistency in the argumentation. But it was the irony of having a Unitarian and an independent fundamentalist Baptist King James only radical looking at the same text and coming to obviously opposite conclusions. But still, both of them allowing, I think, their theological context to override just simply looking at the text. And what do I mean by that? Well, you can look at the data; it's right there in front of you. You can see the manuscripts. Okay, you can see which manuscripts. What you can weigh these manuscripts, things like that. But that doesn't explain how the variant arose, and that's what people need to understand. Because unfortunately, when you see variants like this, it's far too easy to get into the YouTube conspiracy theory, Candace Owens. Oh my. All right. So how did this variant arise? Well, let's take a look at it. A couple things to remember. The earliest manuscripts of the New Testament, for the first almost 900, almost 1,000 years of the transmission of the text of the New Testament, it was written in what's called uncial or majuscule script. And you can see that on the screen right now. Capital letters, no spaces between words, and almost no punctuation whatsoever. Now, when you learn to read Greek, and then you run into this, you're just left going, what is that? Because today's Greek text, so much more easy to read. Capital letters, small letters, spaces, punctuation, paragraphs, all sorts of fun stuff. There was some paragraphing in the majuscule text. But anyway, reading unsealed texts is something that takes a lot of practice, and there aren't very many people that are overly good at it. I was really getting into that for a while when I was working on P45. Haven't had as much time to be doing that. I've got. There's a great set, by the way, the New Testament papyri facsimiles that Hendrickson put out with CSNTM. That's great to have, especially if you like to have paper books, which you might want to have. Keep them. Don't get rid of them, folks. Don't get rid of them. We don't know what the future is going to hold. So reading unsealed text is very difficult to do. And I don't know about you, but copying this would be very difficult. Remember, we have this perfect lighting in here. I've had LASIK. We can put our reading glasses on and have lights at night. You're doing this by candlelight, with no air conditioning, and you're reading somebody else's handwriting. No one can even write anymore in any legible fashion, basically. So finding that variants would arise, the thing that amazes me is that there aren't more variants than there are. Now, up here is God is manifest in flesh, and here's he who is manifest in flesh, and you're probably going to have a hard time seeing what the difference is. If you look real carefully, you can find it. And I made it a little bit easier in the presentation by using color. Now, that color doesn't help some men who are colorblind. Seriously. But you can see where the variant is now. And here is theos, and here is hos. Hos is he who, theos is God. Now, you might go, well, wait a minute. Theos, that's even 2 syllables. There's only 2 letters there. Right. Because theos is one of what's called the nomina sacra. The nomina sacra, the sacred names, these were not just names, but also some words. We do not know. There's lots of theories. It's a great thing to write a paper on if you want to get published someplace. But we do not know why Christians adopted this particular form of writing. But they did almost universally. Anytime you look at an ancient manuscript from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries, you'll automatically be able to recognize a Christian manuscript by their use of the nomina sacra, these abbreviations. So theos was abbreviated as theta sigma. Now that's a sigma. That's not what a sigma looks like in minuscule script, because you have final form sigmas and then the form of sigma inside a word. But this is the way it was in majuscule script. So it's theta sigma with a line over top. Now, let me remind you of something. Let me remind you what papyri look like. And this is one of the things that I do in the presentation. Here's P66. And that's a good shot of P66. One of the best shots I've ever seen of P66. P66 from around 80, 175, 200 is written on papyrus. Now, papyrus was, you take the leaves of the papyrus plant, you put them at 90-degree angles, you press them together. On one side, it produces a smooth writing surface. The back side is where the veins are of the leaves, and it's a much rougher writing surface. Now, for a scroll, that's no big deal. You just use the rough side on the inside, and you write on the outside, and that's fine. Christians did not like to use scrolls. So one of the major theories is they were trying to differentiate themselves from the Jewish synagogue and its use of scrolls. It's possible. That's also one of the theories as to why the nomina sacra evolved as well. And so Christians preferred the codex. This is a codex. See, you've got a spine. It's the modern form of the book. And that means they wrote on both sides, including the rough side. And what do you see there? You see lines. Are there vertical lines? Yeah, but mainly horizontal lines. And so, can you see how whether a horizontal line was there or wasn't there, especially if the scribe was copying and you're using a quill, and so you have to put ink, and you can only write so many letters before the ink starts thinning out. What if right when it's thinning out is when you get to the key section? A lot of these papyri, that's what you'll find. you'll find words that have, you can even see up here. You can see this part right here. Now this is probably more as a result of wear, but you see how much darker the ink is here than it is up here. Probably due to wear. But, you know, like right here, I mean, there's some letters here that are very difficult to make out. And as these have aged, a lot of people are noticing that the photographs that were taken when they were first discovered 100 years ago are clearer than the photographs today. They are fading. And that's why the work of CSNTM is so important in providing high quality digital photography of these manuscripts. And so that's what papyrus was. And so you have lines. You have vertical lines. And what's the difference between theos and ha? So let me give it to you nice and big so you can see it. There. There's the difference between God and he who. And I've heard audiences just gasp when they see this. Because when they first heard the variant, man, that's a big difference. He who versus God? I mean, how could that ever happen? I mean, that has to be purposeful. And then you see what it actually looked like, and you go, oh, wow. That, yikes. Yeah, I mean, look at that. The only difference between these two is that thin line there and that thin line there. So over here, this is Codex Sinaiticus. And you can see, like, look over here. See the ta right here. See, a lot of that ink has faded over 1,800 years, 1,700 years. You know, darker down here, lighter up here. But clearly, here's the variant. Here's the word has. There's no line up here. There never was. There's no line here. There never was. Now, this is a much later hand, and there are entire books on the various scribes who worked on Sinaiticus and the variations over time. This is at least 700 years after the original. Different dates are given as to when this comes. You can a completely different ink. And those 3 dots is how you indicate a variant. So this is a later scribe trying to get Sinaiticus to read as the liturgical text of the day read, which was by then the Byzantine tradition, which was the majority tradition, which read God. So they've put Theta Sigma in a completely different reading, a completely different ink there into the manuscript. But the original, that's why when we looked back at the stuff here, see, there's Sinaiticus corrected. See the C? That's what we're looking at. And then here, Sinaiticus original. So that's how this gives you the information that here you can see with your own eyes. Okay? This one time, by the way, those of you who listen to the dividing line and don't watch, you're at a disadvantage because we are showing graphic stuff here that is actually of interest and helpful to you. So there's the data. The reason why a variant could arise during the time when papyri are still the primary writing materials being used. So in the early church, papyrus. Then after the peace of the church, Constantine gives money to the church for the copying of manuscripts at the Council of Nicaea. And now you can use vellum. Much smoother, much cleaner. I mean, when you look at Sinaiticus, it is astonishing. Here's what it looked like when I first saw it in the British Library in 2005 or 6. And then look at that. That's what it looks like. That's my Codex Sinaiticus down there. It weighs 45 pounds. I'm not pulling it out right now. But look at the penmanship, the professional level that you've got here. And then compare that to the earliest manuscripts of Paul's epistles. So, for example, this is P46, 175 to 200. Again, it's on papyrus. You can see the damage around the outside. Pros Philippizius, this is to the Philippians. I saw this in Dublin a number of years ago. I've told the story. Oh, and see the nomina sacra there? You can see the nomina sacra there. You can see it all the way through. So you have the manuscripts take on a different character when you have more money to do this work. But when you've got stuff like this back then, it's easy to see how Hos and Theos could be, because both fit there. Now, sometimes a variant just doesn't make any sense. Sometimes mistaking one word for another just results in gibberish and is easily detected. But whether it's Theos or Hos is not a grammatical issue. And so, you can do the conspiracy theory thing and say, yeah, they were specifically trying to do this, and that's why, it's specifically been smuggled into the King James, something like that. No, the King James is translating the Byzantine text. They didn't use manuscripts. They only used printed editions. They used the 5 editions of Erasmus. They used Stephanos, and they used Beza. And they all read the same. And so that's why it's there. Where that come from, it came from the Byzantine. That comes from the later text. And where did the variant arise? If you have an obvious visual reason with tremendous similarity between letters and words, I mean, it's just one letter. It's just one letter difference between the theta and the omicron. There's no reason to go beyond that into conspiracies. Now, Bart Ehrman does that. That's the weird thing here. Bart Ehrman does that. He accuses the Orthodox of corrupting the text of Scripture. That was his big work back in the 90s. And that's what Dr. Smith's doing. And Stephen Anderson just doesn't get into all that stuff. He just blames the modern translators and blah, 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 blah. But if you just want to really look at it, you've got to go, yeah, I can see how a variant could have arisen here without getting into all the other stuff, without impugning the motives of scribes or anything like that at all. When nearsightedness or farsightedness can explain things, it's probably better to go with that than to try to do the conspiracy theory thing. And that's what I would say in regards to this particular situation. So if you've ever wondered about that variant, I hope that this helps you, makes it very clear for you exactly what the difference is and how it arose. And there you go.